Hi, and thanks for watching. I want to talk to you about respiratory physiology and changes that occur during aging. As age increases, we know that the chest wall recoil decreases. The recoil of the lung also decreases, and respiratory muscle strength decreases. This results in some predictable changes to pulmonary function tests. Particular volumes that we'll talk about include increases in the functional residual capacity and the residual volume. These happen partly through an increase in the closing volume of the airways. There is also an increase in dead space ventilation as aging occurs. Specifically measured values that are also affected include the FEV1 and the FVC, which both decline with aging, as well as the FEV1 over FVC ratio. Measures of respiratory muscle strength, such as MIP and MEP, decrease as we age, and the normal value for arterial oxygen also decreases. Lastly, the total capacity for exercise, the VO2 max, decreases as well. Let's talk about functional residual capacity and how we can understand these changes focusing on this particular lung capacity. Remember that at functional residual capacity, the individual is at rest. They're at the end of expiration. The diaphragm and other respiratory muscles are not active. So what you have is really a certain capacity, a certain lung volume, which is determined mainly by the balance between the recoil outward of the chest wall and the recoil inward of the lungs themselves. This shows a difference between a 20-year-old individual and a 60-year-old individual. You can see the recoil pressure being generated by the chest wall at FRC follows a certain pressure volume slope. And here's the inward recoil of the lung at the same level of FRC. These two forces are balanced, and so the total compliance of the respiratory system, total pressure, is at rest, at zero. Compare these things to the elderly individual, where chest wall recoil has now decreased at rest. This curve is now shifted more to the right, more towards zero. You can see for the lung, similarly, it has changed compared to the younger individual. The older individual has a lung compliance that is decreased. The net result of this is that the FRC occurs at a higher lung volume than in the younger person. Residual volume, similarly, is higher as for the 60-year-old compared with the 20-year-old. This is showing the same thing in a different way. So you see normal residual volume as a percentage of total lung capacity is increasing over the decades, as is functional residual capacity. This is a result of decreased elasticity of the lungs, which contribute to an increased closing volume, as well as changes in the compliance of the thoracic cage, and the balance between those two increasing functional residual capacity. This graph demonstrates another way to look at the changes with aging, focusing on the FEV1. This is a graph of the FEV1% predicted over a person's lifespan if it were normalized to 100% normal, being that individual's FEV1 at age 20. So you can see early in life, certainly during childhood and teenage years, a person tends to grow and their FEV1 increases. After 20, or sometime in this decade, lung function begins to decline, and normal lung function decreases so that by a person were to reach the age of 90, they may be down 20% or so from their personal best FEV1. But these changes, again, are part of normal aging. These two flow volume loops also demonstrate some of these changes. The younger individual is noted by the solid line, which we see the nice normal shaped descent of the expiratory limb. In the older individual, the descent is slowed, representing the decrease, a normal decrease in the FEV1 FVC ratio. Again, in aging, that finding is normal. This is one reason why the FEV1 FVC ratio has been known to differ in normal populations based on age. So again, aging impacts a number of values, a number of things about pulmonary physiology, as we can see listed again here. In particular, the functional residual capacity and the residual volume increase, partly because closing volume increases. Dead space is also increased. We haven't talked about that in detail today. The FEV1, vital capacity, and their ratio decrease, as do the MIP and the MEP, measures of respiratory muscle strength. Total oxygen consumption, also maximum oxygen consumption decreases. So in summary, think about the fact that with aging, the lungs tend to sag and the muscles tend to atrophy. This results in an increased closing volume. It is easier for those airways to collapse altogether as the person exhales. That leads to an increase in air trapping and residual volume. The balance between the thoracic cage and the elastic recoil of the lung is shifted, and so FRC occurs at a higher lung volume. Overall, with age, the FEV1 absolute amount decreases, and the absolute VO2 max also decreases. I hope this has been helpful. Thank you for your attention.